people are piling
pouring
into the book club. This is nice thing, Scott, about virtual book club, because if we're hosting this in either of our living rooms, I think we'd run out of room. So
very quickly in my case, that's for sure.
let's give it another few moments here, folks. Get a lot of people sign up for this, which is awesome. Want to give people a chance to get in and get settled in with their copy of their dog-eared copy of the book before we kick things off. So
yeah, I'm gonna I love getting things kicked off. I'm gonna put it in the chat here. Love always knowing where people are dialing in from. So I'm gonna go first. Scott Rothman, Challenger, Arlington, VA.
all right, I'm gonna do the same. Let's everyone stand up and be counted where you. So I am in, there's Brett in San Jose.
Yeah.
Hey, Brett. Somebody from Germany. Excellent. All right. Halifax. Perfect. Don in Austin. I haven't been to Austin in a year and a half, unfortunately.
I haven't been anywhere.
Dallas, that's cool. Yeah,
Oh, Rockville. Someone's not too far from you there.
Okay, cool. Actually, you could come by one of our living rooms, I think.
That is true.
All
right, Curtis, Cleveland, OHIO.
Yeah, there's Curtis.
Cincinnati. Oh, we got Cleveland and we got Cincinnati. This could be a problem.
King of Prussia. Toronto. Toronto is the land of cranes and traffic, as I recall, unless it's changed in the past year and a half. Couple of Albany's here. That's nice. Chicago.
Someone's just getting, Mitch is just getting off of 66. That's fantastic.
There's no,
for those of you not in the DC area, 66 is
Mitch,
not
I know
quite
you're
a
lying.
pedestrian road. Let's just call it that.
Mitch is definitely lying. There's no just getting off 66. And you're definitely not on 66, Mitch, because you'd be stuck on 66 if you were. All right. I think we're kind of at a quorum here.
A point here.
Yeah, we'll get some more folks. As Scott said, I'm Matt Dixon. I'm actually in Silver Spring, Maryland, in Montgomery County. So I'm just north of DC. Scott is in Northern Virginia, in Arlington. Scott, are you at the Challenger offices today?
No, I'm at home today.
You're at home. Okay, got it.
The home office.
The home office, perfect. Where most of us have been for a good long time. So, all right, Scott, I think is going to kick us off here.
Yeah.
Give everyone lay of the land, and then we'll get rolling.
Perfect. I guess officially, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us today. As you know, my name is Scott Rothman. I'm a market director here with Challenger's Effortless Experience Practice. And here with us is someone who probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Tethr, and of course, author of the Effortless Experience book, Matt Dixon. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about this. This is a first for us. So we've done 3 books, though never been to a book club about any of them. So it's
an official launch for all 3. Let's call it
right. Yeah, it's So this is exciting. Thank you everybody for making the time. Hopefully we'll keep your attention and keep your participation across the next 6 sessions.
Yeah.
Back over to you, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, to Matt's point, couldn't be happier to kick off book club. Couldn't be more excited that everyone's joining us. We've got a great, I call it 6 weeks, but I guess it's really 8 weeks since we've got a couple of weeks off for holidays. Got a great 8 weeks planned. It's going to be an opportunity really to get to the heart of Effortless. The thing that I'll add is this book club will be a little bit different than most. We're going to have a lot of folks on the line, and so it's going to be a little difficult to ask a discussion question and then open up the lines and have a conversation. But Matt and I do want this to be interactive. We've got questions we'll ask you, but we also want you to be able to ask questions. So the ask will be to submit all your questions via the chat. And we're going to do our best to incorporate answers into the conversation. In full transparency, we might not get to them in the session you ask the question, but we'll get to them over the course of book club. And that's sort of our incentive to keep you coming back. Another thing that I'll mention now and at the end of today's session, because I know not everyone will be able to stay on for the whole time. If you enjoy our time together today, please, tell your friends, tell your colleagues. We'd love to have them join book club. If you're active on social media, please post about book club on LinkedIn, tag Matt, tag me, If we're not linked in, to each other, please go ahead and do that as well. Appreciate any and all social media sharing. So with all that said, Matt, I think we just kind of kick things off. Yeah.
Yeah, I would, the only caveat I'd offer here, Scott, is if you don't like book club, then please keep it yourself. So yeah.
If you don't like it, our names are not Matt Dixon and
then
Scott
I would remember,
Rothman.
as somebody said, the first rule of book club is don't talk about book club. So
That's exactly right.
all right.
Especially if you don't like it.
Yeah. So yeah, let's should we get going? I know you, Scott, we were gonna maybe talk a little bit about oh, sorry, did you have a question you want to throw out to the team as I get going?
Well, I'm going to put a question into the chat for everyone, which is, what's the one question you've always wanted to ask the author of the Effortless Experience? And Mike's kind of beat us to the punch here, and so we'll get to that. But while they're populating that chat and while they're thinking through that, let's kick things off by we talked about kind of like pulling back the curtain, right? Kind of giving us the very beginning, the behind the scenes. So I think that's probably a good place to start, which is the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as Scott said, he threw it in the chat here. So this is again this virtual book club. My mom is a member of a book club in her neighborhood, and which I think is really just a cover for drinking wine and having a canapé with her friends and that kind of thing. They use the book as an excuse. So no judgment if you do want to be drinking wine. Especially no judgment for our colleague here in Germany, because it probably is, the rest of us might be a little early. But this will be a little bit different. It's virtual, obviously, which is cool because it allows us to be flexible and get lots of participation from our big neighborhood, right, and all over the world, which is awesome. And it's very cool to see where everyone's logging in from, literally all over the world, which is great. And we're recording this. We had a bunch of requests for folks who are in APAC, ANZ, and they want to be able to get a recording and share with their team. So we are doing that as well. So very excited about this. We're going to start, as Scott said, he's thrown out the first question, which is, what's your one question about Effortless Experience? Again, some of those we'll get to in this session, but some of them might be more appropriate for future sessions. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask the question. If you got a question about experience engineering or next issue avoidance or channel stickiness or frontline control, ask that question. Let's get it logged so we know to bring it up later, and we'll certainly do that. And I'll reiterate what Scott said. If we are not connected on LinkedIn, then let's please do that. Say you are a member of Book Club and shoot myself, shoot Scott an invitation. Let's get connected. Okay. Yeah, so Mike, we're gonna ignore your question for right now. We will come back to it though. Mike coming right out of the gates with a tough one on basic principles of human psychology and behavioral economics, which we will get to. But let me start maybe by giving everyone some background on the research and kind of the story behind the story, if that would be helpful. Scott and I both hail from, as well as a number of other folks here online. You see Lauren, I was a colleague of mine for a very long time at CEB. And we were members of the research team in the customer experience, customer service practice. And so we worked with several hundred contact center leaders, customer care leaders, customer support, customer service leaders from across industry, B2B and B2C, all types of companies all around the world. And the way our business model worked, and there's a reason I'm telling you this, is that we would go out every year and we'd run what was called an agenda poll. So we'd go out to our clients, or what we called members, in our case, several hundred heads of customer care, and we'd ask them, what are the big issues keeping you up at night? What are the things that you want to have our research team go look at on your behalf? What would be helpful to you if you had a research team and they could go explore a big question you're wrestling with? And so if I rewind the clock, and Lauren is going to tell me I got the date here wrong, I'm just waiting for the chat to pop up here. I'm going to close the chat window so I don't have to see her correct me. But if I go back to, I'm going to say it was around 2007 when we first, it might have been even 2006, when we first started seeing this topic of loyalty start to, thank you, Lauren. Lauren's going to allow it. 2007, we first started seeing this question of loyalty start to pop up in our agenda poll. And it was like this song that kept moving up the charts, and that really got to the very top. It was the #1 rated topic, which was really, what can customer service do to positively impact customer loyalty? And which is a fundamental question. It seems like a fundamental question to us, I think, now. But if we take ourselves back to 2007, And if we think about those times, that was really right around the time where Net Promoter Score and experience measurement were really starting to take off. And I think if I were to put myself in the seat of many of our members, heads of customer care, I think a lot of them candidly were being asked hard questions by the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the COO of their organizations, who were very focused on improving loyalty, improving advocacy, Net Promoter Score, and really trying to figure out how do we keep, put a bear hug around our customers and keep those customers and get them to buy more, and get them to say great things about us and tell all their friends. And so people started asking hard questions of our members, heads of customer care. What can you guys do to help further that goal? And there might have been even an undercurrent to that question, which is, hint, hint, you're not helping out very much, because we get a lot of complaints about customer service right now. So what can you do to help further our objectives? And so that started a research project in the 2008 timeframe, which was designed originally to understand an answer to a pretty simple question, which is, what can customer service organizations do to make customers more loyal? But more specifically, what we were trying to understand was, how do customer service organizations delight at scale? And the reason we went with that question is that all of the background research we had done had pointed us to the very clear conclusion that, which everybody seemed to already know, which is that we all know how customer service can make customers more loyal. It's by delighting them, by surprising them, by wowing them, by providing a superlative experience, one that exceeds the customer's expectations. And so our question as a research team wasn't to go back and revalidate something that everyone already knew was true. Instead, it was to try to understand, how do real companies deliver this? Because, if we think about a lot of the stories around delight, which make for great TV commercials and press releases, and we think about things like, the Joshy the Giraffe story, which I'm not going to tell here unless somebody asks in the chat. We think about the woman who returned the set of snow tires at the Nordstrom's men's department, right? We've read about the Zappos 9-hour phone call, and they gave somebody an award for having a 9-hour phone call with a customer. Think about those legendary stories of service at Disney, at Four Seasons, at Ritz-Carlton, where every member of the staff is empowered to spend up to $300 to delight a customer in their moment of need. Customers forgotten their dress shoes and they have an important work meeting, or they lost their phone charger at the airport, or whatever it is. And they're allowed to spend that money, no questions asked, to delight that customer and provide that wow moment. And we think about that. What's interesting is, again, none of us have ever stopped to question whether that was the right thing for us to be doing. We all kind of assumed it was, because it sort of is intuitive, right? It makes sense that delighting customers would make them more loyal to us. They'd want to stay with us. They'd want to buy more. They'd want to say good things about us. It never occurred to us that that would be wrong. So we went out and ran a survey. It was a global survey. We started with, I think the sample was roughly 40,000 customers. It grew. We reran it for a while up to about 100,000 customers. We kind of pulled up, and that's the data set we used to write the book off of. But the survey was designed to understand all of the ins and outs of a customer's experience with a company. So went to companies, many of those companies actually on the book club Zoom today, who participated in that original research, and went to those companies. We said, hey, give us names, email addresses of customers who had recent service interactions with your organization. And some of those service interactions were asynchronous. Maybe some of them were email or chat or case-based. Some of them were live phone calls. Some of them were self-service interactions on the website or app. I think back in 2007 if we had apps. I think we did. Maybe.
I think so at that point.
Yeah, they were.
I think I was still printing out my boarding pass as well as bringing the app with me. But
yeah, actually, Scott showed me sent me a picture of his book, which had a paper boarding pass as the bookmark, which shows you how long he's had that book. So, anyway, so we think back on, we went out and surveyed customers, and what we tried to understand was everything that happened around that service interaction. So what caused it? Where did you go? Did you get the problem solved in that channel, or did you have to switch to a different channel? Did you have to talk to somebody or chat or email with somebody? And what was the nature of that interaction? All the ins and outs of the interaction. We asked, of course, did the company resolve your issue? And we asked a whole host of questions at the end about, as a function of that experience, how likely are you to keep buying from that company, to spend more with them? If they came along with a premium offer or a new product you might add to your account, would you entertain that offer? And your likelihood to spread positive or negative word of mouth. And so we regressed all that data, and what we found was pretty surprising. And it's Scott, let me ask you to pull up the first slide. We're only going to show you a few slides here, a few of the key slides. And we'll pull those up, and we'll use those just to anchor a little bit of our discussion. And actually, Scott, I'm going to pause after this one and just get your take on this. This is one of the graphics I think that is most well known from the research. The reason was that it provided an answer that we weren't necessarily looking for. We were out there, as I said before, trying to understand, how do big companies delight at scale? You know, most of us are not Disney or Zappos or Ritz-Carlton or Four Seasons. And so how do the rest of us delight, right? How do we do so when we have the CFO breathing down our neck saying, you know, I can't justify everybody spending up to $300 to delight a customer and wow them in a moment of need? Like, we've got to watch the bottom line as well. So how do we regular people actually delight, the regular companies delight our customers? But we always assumed delight was the right answer. But the first thing that I remember distinctly, Timur Hijilmaz is a member of leads the Challenger research team. Karen Freeman, Lauren Pragoff is a member of the team, coming to our first meeting where we started to review the output from our survey. And it was like, Houston, we have a problem. And the problem was this, it was what you're looking at right here, which is, it turns out that the conventional wisdom around surprising and delighting customers and going above and beyond was actually kind of flawed. And it was flawed in two specific ways. So let me point that out to you here. What you're looking at here was a graphical depiction off of from the original research, 54,000 customers in that original study. And what we found was two things. First thing we found was that customers, when you meet their expectations, they're actually quite a bit more loyal than we assume they are. Now, of course, we know, and you guys read the book, the first few chapters. So you know that dashed line represents the conventional wisdom, what most of us think the relationship is between service delivery against expectations and customer loyalty. And we all think it's like a hockey stick curve, right? We don't get paid until we go above and beyond, or at least that's what we've been taught to believe. But the first thing that we found was, like, actually, customers are pretty darn loyal if you simply do what they expect, right? If you simply deliver against their expectations, they're pretty loyal. The bigger surprise, though, is how the curve kind of flattens out beyond that point of meeting expectations. There's a point of diminishing marginal utility or return beyond just meeting the customer's expectations. And what that told us is, boy, a lot of companies out there, they implore their front line to please, like, go out, delight that customer, wow that customer. And when those things happen, and when the customer writes a letter or sends a note or a Facebook message or a tweet about that great experience, what do? We call that rep up in front of the entire organization at the weekly pull-up or the daily pull-up. We give them a Starbucks gift card or a plaque or a certificate. We put that thank you note up on the wall of fame. We pat that person on the back, and we go tell everyone else, go do the same exact thing. That is the kind of experience we want to be known for. That is the kind of experience we want to deliver. And the reason is, we think by doing that, customers will be more loyal. But what the data actually tells us is that all those things we do to try to go above and beyond and wow and surprise our customers when they reach out to us in a moment of need, when they reach out with a service request, that we spend a lot of time and energy getting frontline people to do this, gearing our measurement systems, our metrics, our QA scorecard to point towards the things that would deliver a superlative, delightful, exceptional experience. We spend a lot of money doing this. We make exceptions to policies. We issue refunds that cost our company money. We release longer calls, more talk time, escalations, all this stuff. So it costs us real money. And what the data shows us is that we spend a lot of effort and money trying to delight our customers, and our customers don't pay us back with their loyalty. And so that was, I think, maybe less for this group in book club, I think maybe less surprising now. You guys probably already knew this, but this was the original finding, I think, that caused a lot of kind of head snapping. I wouldn't go so far as to say people threw rotten tomatoes at us, but this did not make people happy. I'll tell you now. I have a couple of stories I'll share here. I'm going to look at the chat, Scott, but I'm going to throw over to you and ask what you hear from customers. What's your take on this? Does it still raise eyebrows in the way it did when we first came out with it?
So I don't know that it raises eyebrows like it first did. I think, over the years, people have gotten used to this and have slowly come around, but I think there's still a bit of a spectrum. I think on one end of the spectrum, you have people go, I buy into this, I get it, I fully grasp that we're not going to delight our customers. Like, you know, at best, we're over on the left-hand side. So I'm just hoping to get to the middle here.
Yeah.
I think on the other end of the spectrum, you have people go, well, you know, I got to tell you, we're a little bit different than everybody else. We do go for the delight and so on. And I think what often can be surprising for people is when you say, well, any idea how difficult it is to achieve that delight? How is it going, right? In the book, you've got the 4 questions, right, around, you know, are you actually able to do these 4 things to delight customers? And I think where it starts to kind of, where the light bulb starts to turn on for folks is when you start to go, hey, so how are you achieving? How do you know you're achieving? And oh, by the way, you know, and this is being talked about in the chat right now, is the other problem is once you delight, you raise the bar each time that customer interaction, so that bar keeps going.
Yeah.
And you sit there and go, listen, you don't want to be horrible, right? You don't want to be over on the left-hand side of this chart for sure. But when you start to realize just how tough it is to achieve the right-hand side, and then to your point, it's not financially worth it, you start to get people to come around slowly but surely. But a lot of times, folks in customer service do have this mindset of, you know what, that's not us, right? We do delight, we do wow. And you know, again, I've seen some of this in the chat already, but I think you and I both know, you go to a company's website, you hear from their marketing team, it's still the language is above and beyond, exceed expectations, and delight. And I don't want to take us down that rabbit hole just yet, but you still see a lot of it out there. And I think the conversation that we often have is, hey, how does that trickle down into your space as the leader of customer support?
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot in what you just shared, Scott. I think one of the you know, one of the things I'll say is I've not come across, I have certainly visited with a lot of companies, visit their call center where they are really focused. I got a bunch of pictures on my phone. In fact, I was just looking at the other night from visits at customer organizations where they're actually, their call centers really focused on lowering effort. But that idea of like, you know, what you're really saying is like, don't get everyone excited about delighting, just tell them to go out and shoot for average is like not super exciting motivational, right?
Not all that inspiring, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Hey, go be average.
How to do it, because there are ways to do it. I think there's a couple interesting comments here. You know, Hugo asking how often we get pushback on this. I don't know, Hugo, it's a good question. I think a lot more when the research first came out. So I remember back when we before the book, some of you may have read the article in HBR that preceded it in 2010 called "Stop Trying to Delight Your Customers," for which we got no shortage of hate mail about. And it was that was where we first released this finding that, you know, delight doesn't really pay when it comes to service interactions, customer support interactions. I think the pushback on it has really tailed off. And I think what's interesting is oftentimes you know, people, as they think about what in their gut kind of feels like right answer, and then they look at the data, and then they start to think about their own personal experiences. Even business people, right, think about their own personal experiences. They start to realize like, yeah, actually, that's not really what I'm looking for as a customer. When something's gone wrong, I'm looking for something else, which we're going to get to here in a moment. I'll just share a couple of real quick stories about this one. Here's one I haven't shared in a long time, but I'll share it with you guys. I remember sharing this once, or go back many years. This is actually before the book came out. We were working on the book, and I remember we had my father-in-law and my mother-in-law over for dinner, and he was asking me about the book, and I was telling him, you know, it's this idea of, you know, that delight doesn't really pay, and that it's all about making it easy and reducing effort and all the stuff, and that's the key to customer, you know, mitigating disloyalty, right? And it turns out this whole notion of like going over the top doesn't really pay. And he said, because he's my father-in-law, and I think father-in-laws are genetically engineered to disagree with their sons-in-law, that that's wrong. And let me tell you why it's wrong. And he said, I've got a story. He told me this story. Some of you may have heard me present on this, but he told me the story of when he bought an iPad. Back so iPad was a new device. He bought it. He didn't get the Apple Care because the device is really expensive, and the Apple Care is kind of expensive too. And so he didn't buy it. And then he stepped on the device in the dark in his hotel room. They'd fallen asleep and it dropped on the floor, and he got up to use the restroom and stepped on it in the middle of the night and smashed it. And so he said, Here was my experience when I went into the Apple store. I walked in, like with like tears in my eyes about like this beautiful new device, which I'd fallen in love with. I had it for like a week or 2 weeks and it was smashed to bits, and I didn't buy the Apple Care. Like the thing that would have, like, I could just turn it in and got a new one. I didn't have that. So I walked in, and the Apple genius, or the manager, came up to greet me and said, "Oh boy, what happened to your iPad?" And I told him the story, and he took pity on me and said, "We want you to have a great experience. And I know you didn't buy the Apple Care, but I'm going to give you a new one. I'm just going to swap this out. Can you do me a favor though and buy the Apple Care on the new one?" And he said, I grabbed that manager by the hand. I shook his hand and I said, "You, sir, have earned a customer for life. I will never buy a computer, a phone, a tablet that is not an Apple product." And the guy said, "Yep, no problem. Thank you for coming in, and sorry that happened. And thank you. I hope you have a great experience." So, and then he said, "And to prove that you and your 54,000 data points are full of it, let me tell you what happened." He said, "Then a couple of months later, I was in the market for a new laptop. And instead of going and buying a replacement for my Windows machine, I actually went to the Apple store. I found the manager who took pity on me and gave me the new iPad. And I said, I'm making good on my promise. I'm in the market for a new laptop. Can you show me what you got? Crap, I've never had an Apple laptop. Show me what you got." And I bought one. I bought a really high-end, top-of-the-line laptop. Guy was thrilled to sell to me. It was great. And so I know that delight does pay because it paid in my experience. And so I said, okay, well, that's fine. It's N of one. So then we had dinner. It was very nice. And I was like biting my tongue so hard it was bleeding. And then, after dinner, we're sitting around, we're having coffee and dessert. And my mother-in-law mentions that my father-in-law just bought her a new phone. And I said, "Oh, wow, that's amazing." I said to my father-in-law, I said, "Did you buy her an Apple device? Because you're a customer for life." He goes, "No way, those things are way too expensive. I got her some cheap." And so then I was like, really, like, steam started coming out of my ears, and my wife called it a night. And that was it. So long story that people autobiographical, but I had to get it off my chest. But I'll tell you, go ahead, Scott.
Well, no, sorry, if you're gonna, I was gonna follow up with I know, I don't want to bore people with too many stories, but it's as I think about this page, as I think about the way you kind of highlighted or defined loyalty on page 8 of the book, and I see Roberta's comment here about being treated as being answered by robots and auto chats. I had an experience with Uber Eats just last week, and I think it's kind of pertinent to this conversation where a lot of times when I talk to people, Matt, the question that I ask them to kind of get them in the mindset is, look, we're all consumers in our own personal life. Yeah. When you think about an easy service experience, who do you think of? If you think about that service experience, it just drives you crazy. Who do you think of? And when we think about the easy experiences, you hear companies like an Apple, maybe a Zappos. You start to hear things like Uber or something along those lines. And so end of last week, for those of you that don't know, I've got a 21-month-old daughter at home, which makes for exciting evenings, let's say, and plenty of ordering in and delivery. And so ordered Uber Eats. I made a mistake as soon as I pressed send, right? And my wife goes, "Oh, no, you've got this." So I hit cancel because I just needed to reorder something, right? And I went to cancel, and they said, "Well, you've just been charged, the $75 or whatever we're spending." And I went, "No, I don't want to cancel." And so I went to call, I guess because I'm still old school and I like to call when it comes to money or whatever it may be, and the number's down, right? Couldn't do that. I was forced to use the chat, and no kidding, what I was told was that, "I'm sorry, you can't cancel." And I said, "Well, I don't really want to cancel it. I just need to add something to it." And they're like, "Oh, so you want to cancel it? Okay. But I'm sorry, our processes say you can't." I mean, I'm butchering this a little bit, but Roberta, to your point, I wasn't sure if it was a person or a robot. If it was a person, they were following a script, and I was just getting frustrating. I was getting frustrated by the minute. Now, the long story short is 5 days later, they finally credited my account, but I had to go through all these hoops and hurdles to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so it's just a perfect example of when you think about, Roberta, your comment in the chat about being treated like a robot. And then, as you say, Matt, in the book, look, when we talk about loyalty, it's because people stay with you. They stay with you because they want to, not because they have to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there going, well, I've got Grubhub, I've got DoorDash, I've got all the other things I can use.
Mm-hmm. Very
So
spot on. This is, I think, where I'd wrap us up here, and then maybe we'll go to the next slide here in a moment. But just the last thing I'll say on this one is, I think over the years, this is the biggest question I get when I present this material is, I think the question is, are you saying we should never delight? And I think there's been a little bit of that in the chat window here. And, why wouldn't we wow our customers and delight our customers, exceed their expectations? Like, what's the point of being a business if you're not trying to do that? And I think where I've arrived is more of a nuanced view of delight. And it's this. It's that you absolutely should be delighting and wowing and surprising your customers and exceeding their expectations. But the place you don't want to do that or don't need to do that is when things go wrong. When the product or service you sold the customer doesn't work and isn't doing what the customer wants, that is not the time for delight. That's the time for, as we'll talk about in a moment, making it easy and getting the customer back up and running. However, all the things you did to get that customer to even consider you and to pick you, whether that's a differentiated product, right? A delightful product, a store experience that was second to none, a cool, exciting brand, a sales experience that was insightful, as we talked about in the Challenger sale. Those are things that you should absolutely keep doing, right? Because again, like, you're not gonna be around very long if you're not. But what we talk about is kind of where you want to delight. And I think, as my mom said, well, after she read the book, after some prodding, I think she fell asleep a few times. After some prodding, she finished it and she said, so what you guys are really saying in this book is the way you want to delight is making it easy. And I was like, there you go. And she said, why didn't you just call it like the new way to delight customers? I was like, well, you probably wouldn't have read it if we called that. So anyway, but I tongue in cheek, but what I would say is let's think about this. We've talked about a little bit in some content out there, the way we think about customer loyalty. And here's how I encourage everyone to think about it. It goes up to the comment Scott just made about the different flavors of loyalty. If you think about loyalty in two dimensions, on the one dimension, this is not in the book, by the way. On the one dimension, we've got the stickiness of the brand or product. So to what extent is that a brand or product we just got to have? We just love it, or we're in love with the product. It's sticky, it's attractive, it's exciting, it's unique, it's priced well, all that stuff. On the other dimension is the effort of the experience. So if we want to go from low to high on stickiness, we want to go from high to low on effort. And so the win-win box across these four cells, because as a researcher, everything falls into a four cell. The win-win box is a sticky product or brand with a very low effort experience. Now, Scott mentioned before, when I ask people who fits in that box in your world, in your experience, I start to hear the same companies. I hear Apple a lot. I hear Amazon. For me personally, I would point to, Amazon Prime is a great example of that. An incredibly sticky value proposition in product. Like, I don't even know how much I pay for Prime a year. I just know it comes with a ton of value. It's great. They could double the price. I probably still wouldn't know. I'd still pay for it. And when things go wrong, it is so easy to get them fixed. I know that's not been everyone's experience, but that's been my experience. That is a paragon kind of example of a company which is in that sticky brand or product, low effort experience. Now let's think about the other cells. Obviously, there's the lose-lose box. Nothing redeeming about your product or value proposition or brand or your pricing, and it's hard to do business with you. Like, look for another job, because your company's not going to be around for very long in that world. The other cells are interesting, though. Think about a high effort experience but one where that's a pretty sticky brand or product. For me, I think about, there's a couple of things here. I think about the BMW I used to, not pointing fingers at anybody who works at BMW, but I think about that car, which was so cool and was so much fun to drive and cost me a fortune every time I took it to the dealer. And at just some point, it was just really hard to be a BMW customer because I bought a used one and had lots of problems and all that stuff. But man, it was awesome to drive when it worked. Or I think about airlines or hotels sometimes fit, my bank, cable companies sometimes fit in that zone too. And that's the zone, as Scott said before, of captive loyalty, right? It's sticky, but because I'm kind of stuck, right? I have a lot of miles, I have a lot of points, it's hard to switch banks, it's just a pain. And so I just stay, but it's not necessarily a low effort experience. It's actually kind of a pain I dread every time I have a problem with these folks. And if something better came along and if it became easier, I would switch. In fact, I'll tell you personally, I just switched mobile carriers after I got fed up after 20 years with the same mobile carrier. I finally switched because I got a compelling offer And by the way, switching was also a pain. But I got a compelling offer, and it just made the switching costs kind of go away in my mind. I was like, you know what? Now is the time to bite the bullet. And I just had a really bad experience with my current provider. I'm switching. And think about the other box too. You've got those easy experiences, but nothing particularly redeeming about the product. I think about maybe it's my neighborhood grocery store, right? It's not the Whole Foods, it's not the Trader Joe's, it's not the, Harris Teeter. It's not the most exciting store, but they got what you need. It's a place to go and you get in, get out. There's always a parking spot, and the lines are pretty short. The prices are reasonable, but nothing. If a better place opened up next door, I'd probably switch. Anyway, that's kind of how I think about it. It's a bit more of a nuanced frame. Scott, let's do this. We go I'm not going to answer your question, Mark, about who that was.
I was wondering if you're going to address that. I was wondering.
No way, man.
Let me can I add 2 cents before we turn the page? What's really interesting as you were talking, what it made me think of is years ago, back in our CEB days, we did some research around the customer experience, and we had this finding, or we came across this finding that said, look, at the end of the day, you're really better off if you just don't screw up in the first place, right? Which I think makes sense, right? No customer wants to be on the receiving end, and there's this notion of, but at the time there's this notion of, listen, if I've got a good service recovery team in place, if I've got a good support team in place, then all is well, right? And what I do hear a lot of these days is with the increasing amount of self-service, and obviously tech stacks in the customer service space have grown tremendously over the last few years, there is that hope of, listen, we are making it easy for our customers to do stuff with us, right? So to your point with an Amazon, to buy. With an airline nowadays, it's pretty easy to buy a ticket. But I think the thing that often gets glossed over is that what we're talking about here is, listen, when something goes wrong, how easy does that customer make it for you? Not how easy is it to buy, not how easy is it necessarily to use. I'm not saying that doesn't come into play, but what we're talking about quite often here is, again, when something goes wrong.
I think that's right. But what's been interesting to me is that as this thing has kind of taken on a life of its own, what's been so interesting is it's where this effortless story ends up getting picked up. So I've been asked to present this stuff to product teams, to marketing teams, to sales teams. In not research that we did, but other colleagues at CB, research around the sales experience or the marketing experience. It turns out that ease wins, right? And it turns out that actually is a differentiator in many respects. So.
One of the questions that we get quite often from our clients is, hey, look, how do I take this to the rest of my organization? Right. How do I get this outside of customer support? And you well know, back in the CB days when we were running the Operations Research Council or Operations Leadership Council, I spent a lot of my time working with operations teams at adopting this practice, right? How do you make it work for a corporate function that isn't necessarily serving end customers, but internal customers? Yep.
Absolutely. And I see here Michelle saying she, makes all of her product leaders read the book. It's great. I mean, I think this has become, in being easy to do business with is something I think all parts of the business should aspire to. I will tell you, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because one of the things I find, which is a little bit of a problem of our own making, has been some of the focus on the measurement piece, right? And I know there have been a couple of questions in here about traditional call center metrics, measuring effort and things like that. We have, I think it's the last module about making effort stick, and we'll talk about customer effort score and all that stuff. In some ways, I think people love the next big question, right? The new question that's going to solve everybody's problems. And I think people get really focused on that. One of the things I find myself often in a situation of is when a customer reaches out and says, well, we're not a customer effort score shop. And oftentimes the response I provide is like, well, do you believe in being easier to do business with as a company? They say, yeah, absolutely. I was like, who cares if you measure customer effort score or not? That's not really the point. The point is that being easy to do business with, producing products that are easy to use, a sales experience, making yourself easy to buy from, a brand pricing that's easy to understand, right? And a post-sales experience when things go wrong, as Scott's talking about, and we're going to talk about for the rest of the book club, that's imperative that you make it easy. And so ease is actually a really smart thing to pursue, whether or not you measure the metric, but we are going to talk about that metric later on. Let's go to the next slide here, Scott, just in the interest of time.
Yeah.
So this was, we just have this and a couple of other ones to share with you. This slide, and we won't spend as much time talking about these next few. I think I'll roll through them and then we'll kind of pull up. Scott, maybe if you can keep an eye on the chat as we go through it. So the question that came up, of course, when we found this inconvenient truth, right, that delight doesn't really pay and that the conventional wisdom is flawed, we asked the question, well, what impact does service have on loyalty? If the relationship is not above and beyond service drives higher loyalty, then what is the relationship? And so this is what we found. And we went from kind of surprising, interesting, head scratching stuff to depressing stuff here on the side. And we'll get to the good news for the rest of the book club. But the depressing thing was this, is that service interactions in our analysis were 4 times more likely to create disloyalty than loyalty. And I think what's interesting, before we go to the call out box there on the right, which is what drives that disloyalty, as you all know, because you already did your homework. But I think before I show this, when I show this, I think sometimes people look at those bars and they draw the conclusion that this stands to reason because the customers had a problem, and so they're in a bad state of mind when they reach out to us. And that's not actually what the data is saying. What the data is saying is the customer may be in a bad state of mind or not, but it's the way we handle the interaction that actually creates that disloyalty. It actually takes what could be a nominal or maybe slightly bad situation, makes it much worse. So it's the way that we handle these interactions that creates that negative 3.97x disloyalty effect. And when we parse that apart and we look at the statistical drivers, you guys see what you find on the right-hand side. So these are what I call the usual suspects of bad customer service or bad customer experience. So repeat contacts, we're going to talk about that in the next issue avoidance module for book club. But this is about when the customer's got to chase down an answer to the question by calling back or opening up, chasing down email responses, and they don't feel like they get anywhere, and just takes repetitive contacts to try to get an answer. You got channel switching, another one we're going to talk about, which is about when the customer goes to one channel and then has to pull up the 10 stakes and leave and go to another channel. So maybe, for example, they went to your website or used your app, they didn't find what they were looking for. Maybe they got more confused, and then they called the 800 number to talk to somebody. So that act of going from one channel to the next. Transfers. So when the customer reaches out and feels like, or is told, I can't solve your problem, you got to talk to those folks in that department. I can't even connect you. Here's their phone number, right? But it's kind of that phenomenon of passing the buck. Repeating information. So it's a big one as well. But this is big stuff, like when the customer tells their story over and over again to every rep who they get passed on to, or every person they got to talk to when they call back over and over again. Or honestly, small irritants as well, like when the customer is authenticated via the IVR by keying in their account number, and then the first question the rep asks is, can I have your name and your account number to re-authenticate them? All right, and we know why we do this, right? But customers don't understand that stuff. Robotic service, this came up in the chat, the feeling that I'm being treated like a number or a policy holder or an account holder, not like a person who has likes and dislikes, wants and needs, preferences, and expects not a generic robotic scripted experience, but a personalized, tailored experience. Policies and processes that customers have to endure. So this is interesting. This is where our service reps often kind of hide behind policy, display what we call a Tethr powerless to help posture. So nothing I can do, policy prevents me from doing it. And these policies don't make any sense to the customer whatsoever, but feel to the customer like things that were thrown up just to create obstacles or roadblocks that distance them from the thing they really want, which is an answer to their problem. Give you a real quick illustration of that if you're trying to get your head around that one. So I was trying to redeem some over COVID, because we didn't travel and nobody did. I had a gazillion rewards points with my credit card issuer, and those were to be redeemable for travel related purchases. So the way that works is if anything is coded as a charge by a travel merchant, so a hotel, plane ticket, Uber, anything like that, it can be kind of removed from your bill. So I called up and I had a sum total of $60 of travel related expenses, and I had more than $4,000 worth of points. So I called up and said, well, I just bought spent $1,000 on ski passes for a ski trip we're going to take over New Year's. I'd like to redeem that. And they said, well, that's not coded as a travel purchase. And I said, well, I don't live at a ski resort, so by definition, it is a travel experience. So why don't you just swipe it up? It was like, and these tickets cost me like $1,000, and I've got $4,000 worth of points to redeem. And the person just started citing policy. You don't understand. That's not how it works. And it's got to be a travel related purchase and so on and so forth. I said, let me speak to your supervisor. So transfer me to the supervisor, who said, oh, that's easy. I see we can take, what we can do is take that $60 purchase and I'll just redeem it 4,000 times. to get you, quite literally. And so she had to do it manually, like literally redeem, 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 redeem.
Yeah.
And so we got to know each other really well during this process. But it was so interesting because I said to her at the end of the thing, I said, "You're obviously a tenured rep." I said, "Why did the other person I talked to start with citing the policy for me? I mean, I've got all these points. I want to redeem them. I've been a customer for 20 years of your bank, and I've been a good customer for a long time. I spent a lot of money with you guys. And why was his first inclination to hide behind policy instead of trying to own the problem and get to an answer?" And she said, "I don't know, just the way most people roll around here." And so that was it. But it's anyway.
Are you going to say that she's going on your ski trip now, or no? I kid, but
I don't have enough points to buy her a ski ticket, unfortunately.
So just really quickly on a related point, where I tend to find people's attentions to this bullet point, the industries are that get drawn to this bullet point are usually regulated industries, right? So financial services, insurance, utilities, and so on. I mean, they go right to it. They go. Yeah. They see this list and they zero in on it.
Yeah. By the way, good question here about before we go to the next slide here, Scott, but about the extent to which the product itself was responsible for the disloyalty. We don't capture that. This is capturing it indirectly, though, right? So one of the things we know from using machine learning to study chats and emails and recorded calls at Tethr is that many times, the reason the customer called in doesn't have anything to do with the contact center, and it was a function of a bad product experience, right? The thing they bought isn't working, or they're not satisfied with it, or it's not functioning the right way. So that's driven the contact. But then what we're talking about here is the way in which that is handled by the care organization, by the support organization, is what creates that disloyalty. But very good question. This doesn't mean that the original source of that disloyalty wasn't a bad sales experience, a bad store experience, a bad product experience, a bad website experience. It could be any of those things. This is talking about the way we handle it. But I know Scott gave me the time check here, so let me blow through the next real quick. Just to sum up, if we could just really quickly, Scott, go back to the last slide.
Sorry about that.
No worries. What I always tell people, if this is the last book club you come to, just remember this, that the big takeaway from the research was the following. The conventional wisdom is that we can create customer loyalty by surprising and delighting customers when things go wrong. And that has been beaten into our heads for years and years and years, passed down from leader to manager to frontline rep forever, for as long as time in the call center, in the customer care organization. What we found was a little bit different. It was that rather than trying to make our customers more loyal to us by wowing them and delighting them, the better thing to do is to make the service experience easier. By reducing effort, we can mitigate the natural disloyalty we tend to create in those service moments. So when we looked at these sources of disloyalty, as you see there at the bottom, what really jumped out to us was this idea that all these things are about the work we put on the customer's plate, the grist mill we run them through, the gauntlet they've got to traverse in order to get their problem solved. These are all sources of customer effort. So the punchline for us as service leaders, as CX leaders, is make it easy. When something goes wrong, if you want to mitigate that natural disloyalty, stop doing these things, make that service experience easier, lower effort, and that will plug a hole in the bottom of your loyalty bucket. And then all the good stuff you're doing with an awesome product, great store experience, a great pricing, value proposition, all those great things, as a killer brand, all that stuff, you'll be filling up that bucket and you won't be letting it leak out the bottom when the customer calls up with a problem, right? So that's what we try to get folks focused on. Let me show you the payoff for that next two slides here, Scott. So first, the first thing is, we've always got to be mindful, right? Top line and bottom line. Let's talk about the bottom line first. The first thing we found is that low effort experiences are actually a lot cheaper for you to deliver. This surprises companies sometimes, especially companies with lots of legacy processes and policies and who are in regulated businesses. Scott talked about that a moment ago. Being easy to do business with is actually hard and can be expensive. But what we found is, if you think about it, a low effort experience is a simpler, more streamlined service experience in which the customer doesn't have to call back 5 times. They go to the website and they find what they're looking for. They don't get transferred all over the place. They don't have to demand to be escalated. All these kinds of things. It stands to reason that if we can get those things done, it is lower effort. Now, how we do it is what we're going to spend the rest of the book club talking about. But let me show you the top line impact as well on the next slide. So it's not just good for the bottom line, but also remember, we're talking about what we can do to improve loyalty. And it turns out that delivering an easy low effort experience is really good for customer loyalty. When we look at repurchase intent across the customers in our survey, what we found was that 94% of customers who had low effort experiences report back. If they said that was an easy experience, in my estimation, they report back that they would be inclined to renew their contract or effectively not really entertain a competitive offer. Like I'm inclined to keep going with these guys, compared to only 4% who had high effort, difficult experiences. Increasing spend in share wallet on the bottom. So 88% of customers who had low effort experiences say, yeah, I'd be open to spending more with this company as a function of how easy that experience was. By contrast, 4% of those customers who had high effort, difficult experiences say, I would not even consider that as a function of how bad that experience was, how high effort it was. Word of mouth, upper right. So here we're looking at negative word of mouth. This is the propensity of the customer to get off the interaction with us and get on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever and just badmouth us, right, to everyone who will listen, or even in a more contained way, just tell their friends and their coworkers and their family members that don't do business with these folks, they're terrible and they mistreated me. The likelihood that that happens is disproportionately higher in high effort experiences than it is in low effort experiences. 81% of customers tell us that they are inclined to go out and tell other people, no, don't do business with these folks, as a function of how they were treated and how they felt like that interaction went. And then, so the overall, if we sum it up, the overall disloyalty effect looks like this in the bottom. Only 9% of customers who have low effort, easy experiences display any kind of disloyalty attitude toward the brand, compared with 96% who had high effort experiences. So it's cheaper and it's better for our customers. And so as our good friend Rick DeLisi always likes to say, I was going to say, oh, it is a win-win-win. Here's why. It's not just that it's better for the top line and it's cheaper. It's also a much better employee experience too. And, raise your hands here and you can, if you've not been affected by the Great Resignation and are not finding it really difficult right now to find and retain really talented frontline representatives. Everyone's dealing with this right now. It's really tough. It is a job seeker's market. And what we found is that delivering a low effort experience is an experience that your reps far prefer. They don't like getting yelled at about policies that don't make any sense. They don't like getting yelled at by customers who've had to call back for the umpteenth time. They don't like having to transfer people and not being able to solve the problem. They don't like the fact that they spent an hour on the website, got all turned around and confused, and then they called up and took it out on them. They don't want anything to do with that stuff. They like having good conversations that are positive and making things easy for the customer. And so low effort experience is actually a win-win-win. Cheaper for you to deliver, better for your customers, and better for your employees. So if we can get it right, it is really one of those things that delivers that trifecta benefit, which we're going to be talking about for the rest of the series is how do we actually do that? And we'll be breaking it out in much in the way we have in the book, looking at the pillars of a low effort experience. In fact, Scott, I don't know if you know, before we go to some Q&A and some comments here, two things. One, your thoughts on the last couple of slides. And then also, before we wrap up, let's just tee up the next module of the book.
Yeah, so a few thoughts here. I think, for years and years and years, there was this thinking that there was a trade-off. I could either be strong in customer service. In order for me to be strong in customer service, I've got to spend a lot of money. I think that was eye-opening, that stat on the last page, which is, hey, look, low effort experiences actually mean low cost. That was eye-opening for a lot of organizations, or continues to be eye-opening for a lot of organizations that we work with. I think the thing that jumps out at me here is the negative word of mouth. And you talk about it on page 22 of the book. There's some really interesting stats, right? 45% of people with positive experiences tell 3 people. 48% of people with negative experiences tell more than 10 people. Now you factor in social media. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people knowing about one single interaction in the matter of a second, a touch of a button. And we see that all the time. What's interesting right now is that we've got some customer service leaders that own social media and some don't. And it kind of sparks a whole nother conversation. The other point that I'll throw out, it's a conversation that's going on in the chat right now, which is the notion of a feedback loop and continuous improvement.
Right.
And this is something you might remember. We did some research on this, a few years back in the CB days, which was and what we found was that most organizations have a process for formalized feedback, meaning, hey, Matt, I want to talk to your manager. Boom, feedback. Hey, I'm complaining about X. Boom, feedback. What a lot of organizations don't have is a process for that informal feedback. Matt, I'm really upset about this experience I'm having right now. Oh, by the way, what would have been great is A, B, and C. So there isn't a feedback mechanism necessarily for A, B, and C. And that's where a lot of that sort of incremental, important, critical feedback comes because it's kind of top of mind. It's things that we might not be thinking of in the moment because we're so upset about the other thing, but yet it's gone on long enough that it's still germane to the conversation. The last thing that I'll mention, and we don't have time to get into it today, and I think we will in the future. Early on, there's a comment in the chat around, I think, CSAT and the popularity of CSAT versus CES. And you do talk a lot about the connection between CSAT NPS on pages 17 and 18. And the one stat that I'll throw out that hopefully we can talk about later is 20% of customers who are satisfied indicated they plan to leave the company and buy elsewhere, which I think is such a startling statistic, because so many organizations that I talk to are still measuring CSAT, and we'll get into why that is at the next book club maybe. And you see, we get a lot of questions around JD Powers and things along those lines. And it's interesting. There's still there's a tight, I don't know what the right word. There's like a connection to CSAT that we just can't break.
Yep.
I
think that's right. By the way, we're gonna certainly talk a lot about measurement and metrics. And in the CSAT finding, this is pretty consistent with what folks remember from Fred Reichheld's work around Net Promoter Score. Found the same kind of thing. So that insight there around the difference between satisfaction and loyalty is not just ours, but it's been out there for a long time. And one of the other ones I think that we can't lay claim to, but it certainly plays into our own research, is the connection between employee experience and customer experience. And that's something that we'll talk about a bit later in the series. But just to piggyback on one thing Scott was talking about the measurement, the feedback loop, and there's some comments here in the chat about it's one thing to measure, but you got to take action on it. Absolutely. And I think what I see oftentimes, obviously the taking action piece, the measurement is all for naught if we don't do anything with it. But even on the measurement side, I think that this has changed quite a bit, and it's something we'll talk about a little bit later in the series. Is about how do we get our arms around what the customer's expectations are, and where are we causing effort, and is this worth solving? And the reason I raise that is I think the world has changed quite a bit in the days that from when we wrote the book. We used survey data to write the book. At the time, we customer effort score. It's a survey question that was state of the art for finding out what's broken about your customer experience or your customer service experience. And the technology now exists to use unstructured data, a lot like what we do at Tethr. And I think it's very eye-opening to folks, because what they find is the things that the squeaky wheels are not always the ones that should get the grease. Those are the things that might cause a lot of one-off problems and things that customers get very upset about, and they write a nasty letter to the CEO and you get yelled at about it. But if you look at it, it actually doesn't happen that often. It's actually not worth solving compared to the other things that actually cause a lot of customer angst and happen all the time, right? And so I think there's been, the measurement approach and the measurement, I think, philosophy, if you will, for many of us is take limited sample data and then try to make our best guess about what to go do. But if we're honest with ourselves, when the customer writes a nasty letter to the CEO and the CEO calls you, you're going to pull everything out of the one project you have to focus on and go fix that thing, right? Because those things are the things that get all the attention. But we've got to be more thoughtful, I think, about thinking about impact and magnitude. How often does this problem happen? How widespread is it? So that we can create a list from top to bottom of the things that happen all the time that are really awful, and we got to fix those first, right? And do we even know what those things are compared to the things that are, feel kind of painful, but just don't happen that often, or the things that are not actually that painful in the grand scheme of things? So you just got to be more thoughtful about how we measure and how we prioritize. But with that, Scott, you want to tee us up for the next?
Yeah, listen, we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Want to thank everyone for joining us for this first meeting. Same time, same channel next week. Please join us. As Matt and I said at the very beginning, hope you enjoyed this session. If you did, please do link into us, share on LinkedIn. If for some reason you didn't, again, our names are not Scott or Matt.
Or you can link it with Scott if that's the case.
Or just, whatever it may be. But again, appreciate the time. Again, we're going to try to get to all your questions. If you have any questions that we didn't get to, if you have any questions ahead of next session, please send them our way. And again, just thanks for joining us, and we look forward to next week. We'll talk to you soon.
Guys. See everyone next time. Bye.